In this segment, I'd like to discuss and let you make up your own mind. The question today is the City of Austin Cemetery Division prejudiced, biased, and do division managers and city leaders act with bigotry and discrimination when it comes to historic preservation within the city cemeteries? Let's look at December the 5th of 2019. This is the monument of Andrew John Neal. This is what the monument looked like before it was damaged by a tree. This is what happened. This tree branch broke. You can see up high here where it just split and came crashing down, and it tumbled the monument. You can see it just struck it from the back and threw it on the ground this way. You can see that this piece is broken right in here. This urn here sat here on the bottom. And so this piece toppled off of here. This flat piece was on top of this. And then the shrouded urn was on top of that. Here's the monument as before. And then there you can see what happened. Now, while parts of it got broken, this monument didn't fare too poorly. But what did the city do for this monument? Now, all these monuments are the private properties of the families. This guy dies in 1883. And so the families have long died off, or multiple generations removed. Typically, the city would reach out to a known descendant and seek permission, hopefully for the descendant to re-erect it because it's private property. And if not, seek permission and utilize their nonprofit partners, Save Austin Cemeteries, in order to re-erect the monument and put it back in place. So this email was from Melissa Rogers, who's the president of Save Austin Cemeteries, our nonprofit partner, to Tanja Walls Davis and Elizabeth Knuckles about this fallen tree limb. And the gist of this is she's offering to help find the family members, that they would like to be able to let the families know of any damage that occurs when these type of events in any of the 5 city cemeteries. The city never responded back. The city never reached out to any of those families. What the city did was put a cute little fence around it. This is the city's response. They basically uprighted the pieces, bought some plastic poles and some plastic chain, and put a fence around it. Never made an attempt to contact any family members, and never reached out to the nonprofit partner to re-erect this monument. This is a letter from 2013 to a Mr. Carl Crowther. And he's with a group that wanted to install a monument to commemorate Confederate soldiers, which are buried at Oakwood Cemetery. There are over 400 Confederates over at Oakwood Cemetery. And they had a piece of property. The group had a piece of property, and they wanted to erect an obelisk on this piece of property. And the director of the Parks Department basically told them, no, they couldn't do that. They said that this letter is in response to your request to install a monument to memorialize Confederate soldiers at Oakwood Cemetery. PARD staff conducted a review of the request, in addition to a review from City of Austin Law Department, which nobody ever sees, based on legal opinions rendered by the Law Department and PARD's vested interest in providing the community benefits of following best practices. The department has rendered the following decision. PARD will not be allowing the memorial you requested due for the following reason. Since the request of a monument is for a particular person, is not for a particular person, but for the observation of many buried at this location and other locations, this does not comply with our policy. There is no policy. There was no policy. Our policy necessitates that the monument for the memorial of those be buried at that location and gravesite. Now, I can say that because I asked for a copy of their policy. It didn't exist. Okay, moving forward to 2014. The city denies their application. These guys find out about me and reach out to me and ask me about this. And so I basically jumped on and started looking at their proposed policy, which didn't exist. They didn't understand cemeteries. They don't understand what the word cenotaph is. And so I went through all of the cemeteries and showed them cenotaphs. I went to the state cemetery. I showed them the Vietnam Memorial Wall. I showed them many other things. And basically what it turned out is I went out and started looking at the hike and bike trails. And there's monuments for the Catholic war veterans and other things. So it became very clear to me that the city of Austin was discriminating against this group. Let's look at what discrimination looks like in Prejudice. Prejudice is an opinion or a judgment that disregards the facts. An example of prejudice is somebody not liking someone because they don't share their religion or their beliefs. Bias is a disproportionate weight in favor of or against an idea or thing, usually in a way that is closed-minded, prejudicial, or unfair. Many people develop bias for or against an individual or a group or a belief. Bigotry, stubborn and complete intolerance of any creed, belief, or an opinion that differs from one's own, the actions, beliefs, or prejudices. Discrimination, an unjust prejudicial treatment of different categories of people or things. Intimacy, the state or feeling of being actively opposed or even hostile to someone or something. And the last is an injustice, something that is not fair or just. A common cause of injustice is human selfishness. Human injustice is not always caused by an attempt to gain an unfair advantage or malice. It may simply be a result of a flawed human decision-making process. What happened here is the management at parks had Cora Wright and other members, and they decided they'd be damned if a monument that recognized the sacrifices that young boys and men who were drafted into an unpopular war would stand in the cemetery, more importantly, within sight of Martin Luther King Boulevard. So the city tried to block it. The process went through the Historic Landmark Commission, which approved the design. The Parks Department still tried to block it. We got involved and ultimately promised to sue the city of Austin, and the city relented after we showed them that there were multiple examples where the city had done this for other peoples and they were discriminating against this group. So on April 22nd of 2016, the monument was put in place. Now, the monument doesn't have the stars and bars, your typical rebel flag. It does mention the Confederate States of America, and it is exactly what they proposed. It was just trying to remember the men and boys who fought in an unjust war, much like the Vietnam War. All right, this is the end of May of 2020. In just 4 short years, this monument sat perfectly fine. This act here is a felony underneath Texas law. They painted Black Lives Matter on it, no more BLM. And in this part here, you can see where they actually took a grinder and ground through the picture of a man on horseback, this seal that was here. There was no stars and bars on this. It does have the word Confederacy on it because it was remembering men and boys who fought in an unjust war. And so, what was the city's response to this? The City of Austin Cemetery Office Incident Report labels the date of the incident 6/12 or 6/13. The site is Oakwood Cemetery. They don't even bother filling out the section, the lot space, the monument name, the persons involved. It says the Sons of Confederate Monument was vandalized with spray paint phrases Black Lives Matter, no more, and BLM. Cemetery operations communicated damage to the owners of the monument. So the follow-up action was they contacted them to talk about security measures. These guys find out that there's no police report filed, so they end up filing a police report and told the city that, yes, there's a police report filed. This is on July the 7th. They're notifying that the police report is filed and they're looking into getting a crane to have the monument moved. They're looking at having to spend $8,000 to remove the monument. This is exactly what the city of Austin wanted. The people in the Parks Department didn't want this thing there to begin with. They failed to file a police report. They didn't do anything to help these guys out. And look what happens next. And then somebody decided that they were going to come back, and this is what happened. It's tagged exactly the same way. Black Lives Matter, no more, except this time they came in with something heavy and broke off the corners of the monument. A couple days later, the guys get it cleaned up, and they've about had it. They decide they're going to move it. They're going to spend about $8,000, move the thing off site. They're having to fill out all kinds of forms with the city. The city has not lifted a finger. The city didn't even file a police report. They have a meeting, and then people decide that they are not going to give in to terrorism. And so they decide they're going to protect their monument. Here you can see the seal where they came through with a grinder. And again, this is somebody who just doesn't agree with these folks, and they decide that vandalism is the best way to go. This is prejudice. This is racism. And so they came in and they had to get a permit. They had to get permission from the city, and they got 2x6s, and they built a cage around this thing. And they covered it with 3/4-inch plywood. And then they covered that with cement board to prevent somebody from burning the thing down. This was all done at their expense. It took me going to all three of the park offices and taking video of all of their security cameras, and then showing them that they have security cameras in a lot of parks, and they're actually using game cameras in a lot of parks. They finally relented, but the folks, they spent close to $2,000 to protect their property. To my knowledge, they haven't put a camera in yet. And then guess what happens next? Vandalism at a cemetery, regardless of color, race, or creed, is not acceptable at all. I don't care who these people were. They all deserve respect in the long run. Everybody's equal once they're under the ground, from kings to paupers, the people who swept the street, to governors of Texas. They all lay in our city cemeteries. This is a list of the last and first names of the people of the monuments that got tagged at Evergreen Cemetery. The tag here is the sayings that was put on it. And you'll see there's nothing in here that is racist by any means. No, 3, Dumoff, Azrael, which happens to be an angel, the infinity symbol, Kirk, again, the infinity symbol. The only two things on here that are remotely not racial, but homophobic, is somebody's painted AIDS on top of 2 headstones. H.O. Cleo, and then Loki was painted on a tree. So going through these very quickly, here's the front side, here's the back side of this monument, the number 3. You can see that there are polished surfaces here, and then these are the unpolished surfaces where the engravings are. And you can see that this is not acceptable, but it doesn't appear to be racist in any way. It was a shame that this happened, but how the city reacted to this in response to how they acted to the things at Oakwood is what is in stark difference. The city immediately notified the city council members. And again, this happens in September. So the Black Lives Matter movement is picked up speed, and now it's starting to slow down a little bit. This has nothing to do with Black Lives Matter, but this community is African American. They caught wind of this, and they got out in the cemetery, and there was lots and lots of TV interviews. They felt that they were targeted, and that, damn it, something needs to happen. How dare they do this to the black man? And so the city jumped right in and decided that they were going to take charge of this and pay for the restoration and the cleaning of all of these monuments. Even though it's against city code, the director of the Parks Department made it very clear that she was behind the cemetery manager in making this happen. So the question I posed is the city of Austin prejudiced, biased, and do division managers and city leaders act with bigotry and discrimination when it comes to historic preservation within our city cemeteries? And the answer to that is yes. The first example I showed you was a founder early on in Texas, very prominent in Austin's history, who just happened to serve for the Confederacy when he was a younger man. Because of that, his monument still lies broken and in pieces on the ground. The city failed to try to reach out to contact anybody. The second example was an approved monument that was put in place. It was vandalized with paint, much like the monuments over at Evergreen. The difference is the city didn't bother to notify the police, the city council. They didn't even know how to find those folks. I got them in touch with those folks. It was damaged a second time. When these people tried to protect their property, they got nothing but a hassle from the city. They wanted to put up cameras. The city was obviously no help at all. They ended up spending a couple $1,000s and protecting their monument in place the best way they could. And so when it comes to historic preservation, they failed. Those two objects, they failed. Then when it comes to Evergreen Cemetery, this is Tanja Walls Davis. She is our cemetery manager, and this is Kimberly McNeely. She is the director over the division. Kimberly McNeely immediately supports Tanja. Even though the city code specifically says it's private property, the city cannot use public funds and public monies to address this. She throws caution to the wind, and they spend public monies without and do the work without permission from the families. They violated all kinds of codes and standards for historic preservation and conservation. They went and bought materials off the shelf at Home Depot, and they damaged these monuments further. Without taking the proper precautions, they just jumped into it. And so I'd like you to call the city manager's office, and let's start a public conversation about this. Every monument and every cemetery deserves the same respect, the same rules, without city leaders discriminating, using prejudice and bias and deciding what they're going to fix and what they're not going to fix, who they're going to call, who they're going to notify. The reason the nonprofit was started was to address issues like preservation and the city not spending money on private property. But these two ladies here decided that they were going to spend public money. They jumped in hastily and started applying solvents. They can't tell me the list of solvents they used, or they won't tell me. This is another video. Look for it. It's going to be conservation blunders by the city of Austin. What I'd like you to do is call the city manager. Call the city manager of the city of Austin. Email him. Spencer Cronk. Look it up. You'll find it. And ask him why these two ladies are spending public money on private property when it's in violation of city ordinances.